Faith-Based Leadership Roundtable. Please welcome our faith-based roundtable panel moderator, Dr. Reverend Kevin Muriel. Are you in the house, sir? All right. If we could get Pastor Theola Campbell, Senior, Pastor Blessed Assurance Ministries, Pastor Dr. Dallas Wilson, Senior Pastor, Center of Hope Ministries, and Reverend Jeffrey Benoit, Associate Minister, Center of Hope Ministries, and Pastor William Wynn, Senior Pastor, Champions for Christ International Ministries. They will be taking the panel. I could see technicians working very, very diligently to replace the batteries in these microphones so that we could pick up these voices. I encourage all the panelists to speak clearly, adjust your mic accordingly.
Oh boy.
And when we're out in the audience taking questions, please speak clearly into the mic. As you can tell, mine isn't as good as the one I'm speaking in now.
Oh, that's all right.
And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Reverend Dr. Kevin Muriel.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. There we go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
As you all get your refreshments and make your way back to your seats, it is certainly a delight to be here on such a wonderful occasion. I am looking forward to the wonderful dialogue that will take place among this faith-based panel of very intelligent and socially conscious pastors among us. The purpose of this faith-based panel is to highlight positions clergy leaders take in and out of the community to impact societal solutions to increasing diversity and inclusion. We have a wonderful panel here, and I'm going to just ask them to go one by one, beginning with Pastor Dallas here, and just introduce yourself and just tell us why diversity is so important to you.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Dallas Wilson. I'm the senior pastor and founder of the Center of Hope, located in Metro Atlanta, city of Riverdale, and I'm so grateful to be with you on today. Diversity is important to me because the world is diverse. Some people say that Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week. Sometimes I think it's just a day of choice. It's the day you choose to be with the folks that you want to be with. I also think there must be effort for us to become diverse in a world where at times it's so easy to stay within your clique and community. So the church has a mandate, I believe, to begin to expand its borders, to create a different way of thinking of what congregations should look like.
Hi, I'm Pastor Theola Campbell. I'm senior pastor of Release Worship Center, which is under the umbrella of Blessed Assurance Ministry, which I'm the executive director of. Diversity from San Diego, California. Diversity is important to me because I live by the Bible, and the Bible is a proponent of diversity from the beginning to the end. And I think of the passage in the Revelations where it said every tongue, every nation will be in heaven. And we might as well, as my husband loves to say, practice down here.
That's wonderful.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to thank the conveners of this great forum summit to allow us to speak to you, the community, and the interested body that you might take away from what has been said here back to the communities. My name is Reverend Jeffrey Benoit, president of the Clayton Henry chapter of the National Action Network Civil Rights Organization. I attend Center of Hope under the pastorship and leadership of Reverend Dr. Dallas C. Wilson, sitting here to my right. Why is diversity so important to me? Diversity is important to me because we are diverse people. This room may be culminated with just one ethnicity here. However, when we step outside these doors, it's not. And when we step outside our churches, it's not. And when I'm in the streets working in the area of civil rights, I'm not working with just one ethnicity. I'm not working with just one color, race. I'm working with the community. And I think the church has a as Pastor said, a mandate to work in that community outside its doors. And it's my charge to echo that we have to come outside those church walls because the crime and the dying is in the streets. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My name's William Wynn, Dr. William Wynn. Proud to say that I'm the pastor and founder of Champions for Christ International Ministry. Diversity to me simply means what is stated in the Bible as the Great Commandment. When Jesus actually told all the disciples to go out into all nations and compel people to come. That's what I live by, all nations. And that's what we breed at my church, all nations. Every joint supplies, every skin pigment, every mind, every idea, every thought supplies. So when you talk about diversity with me, the first word that comes to my mouth that I X out is tradition. And coming into diversity, and to piggyback off Pastor Wilson, you can't really have diversity with tradition. I think it's time for everybody to step outside of the comfort zone and really start exercising a movement towards diversity.
Thank you all so much. So we've talked about diversity, and as people of faith, as pastors, as the faith community, we understand for us how important diversity is, but obviously there are some barriers to diversity. We know that statistically 93% of congregations in the United States worship one race of people. They are homogenized. But if you walk into a Starbucks on any given day, you will see a multiplicity of races and faces and people that are congregating or communing over a cup of coffee. So what are some barriers to diversity? Why can the church not celebrate diversity as well as the culture often does? What are some of the barriers?
One of the barriers that I see, and what I confronted with several years ago, asking God in prayer, Father, why don't I have more white people attending our ministry? And God told me, because you don't serve the food they like. And I had to pause, and I had to look at my rhetoric and how some of the things that I was saying from the pulpit were condemning. Some of them were just so far off the cuff that it would make anyone who is not from my culture uncomfortable. No one wants to come to a place and to be made uncomfortable. So I believe you have to set out the food for the people that you are attempting to reach. Also, not just in that case, but churches also have to take on a model of excellence. You can't expect people to step out of IBM, major companies, where excellence is the order of the day, but come into the church and step through a porthole that takes them back in a time warp to the 70s. The programs are miswritten. The bathrooms are not taken care of. So therefore, if you want excellence and if you want diversity, I think you must organize the platform and organize the environment to support that which you are trying to attract.
Excellent. Others?
I would like to share that we as a African American culture has had church as family. And it's hard to get family to embrace other family members of a different hue or a different taste. So we as leaders will have to change the mindset of our congregants to be open to invite others into their family and not be so exclusive because we're comfortable, we're happy, we know everybody, it's a good time to break from that historical gathering of this is a safe place where we can come and this is us, to this is a safe place that God has made that invites others.
I kind of echo that same sentiment. I've often tried to champion a Sunday where we attend another church, not as an individual, but as a body of Christ, a congregation, one church to another church, and allow us to share in their worship as they would come to share in our worship. It's often real uncomfortable for one or two to go into a major sanctuary where the body is totally different from you. You're the only black in a whole white congregation. But by virtue of the relationships with the pastors and having a church diversity exchange date, let's just call it that, where the whole church as a congregation would fellowship with the whole church and allow that particular interaction to go on. I brought this up when President Barack Obama took office and we were in the post-racial era. If we're in the post-racial era, then let's do this within the faith-based community as well. It didn't really set well, but it's still something that I would say if we're in the post-racial era, however, it's another era now, that's neither here nor there. But I still think that for us to bridge that gap is that we're going to have to share in one another's cultural interests, biases, so that they can understand ours, we can understand theirs, and we can begin to dialogue.
I think in terms of barriers for diversity in the church, one thing has to do with the lack of exposure, starting with the pastors in the church. I think that it is wise for every pastor to have the opportunity to at least study and dive deeper into 3 different types of religion. That allows us the opportunity, not only in religion, but learning a little bit more Greek and Hebrew don't hurt. It helps us to actually look at the geographical regions in which the Bible dissects, and it helps us to bring back home with the congregations that we're speaking to, which most times are majority black. How do we transition from the mindset of the people that are going to your church that all live in the same area, eat at the same restaurants, speak the same language, see the same things, but yet you expect different? Different to them brings about a term called fear, and that comes from lack of knowledge. So I think in diversity in the church, it has to start with the pastor being diverse.
That's a wonderful point. Let's talk along the same lines of fear for a moment. We often know that one of the reasons we have such a hard time interacting one with another is because of our fear of the unknown. I don't know you, you don't know me, therefore I have these preconceived ideas about who you are, how you worship, what you believe, how you may treat me. How can we break down those barriers of fear so that for the good of the culture, the good of the whole, we can start being more inclusive?
I go back to saying it's not about what you say, it's what you do.
Okay.
And we can say all day long as to how Christian, how religious, how Bible-led and Bible-bred we are. Right. But if, in fact, it's not seen, it's not believed. Right. And we have to make more of an effort to share that. And again, it goes back to that congregational sharing. Right. I believe in that congregational sharing what gives us an opportunity to meet each other, first get over the fear. Ooh, a whole black congregation in my church? Wow, and they didn't even fight. Or whatever their stereotype might have been. Right. When you get a bunch of people together. Right. You heard the stories. Mm-hmm. And I believe by virtue of calming their fears in that particular relationship, that initial relationship, would begin to open up the door of, it's not as bad as I've been led to believe. Right.
I think fear can only be overcome by education and exposure. You fear things that you are ignorant to. My son was afraid of the dark until I flicked the light on and showed him the same pictures that were on the wall when the light is on will still remain there when the lights are off. Sometimes you have to have the fear of the unknown, but also the fear of what you might find when you get there. Fearing other people sometimes is interesting to me. But I think one of the challenges of the church is being able to explain what we do and why we do it, right, and not just deify everything and not be able to explain how this takes place in the context of worship, because other people just don't get it. There are some things we get that other folks just don't get. How is that articulated for the person that comes who is not of my culture and sits between myself and Reverend Benoit? And during the worship experience, my hands go up and I holler. Reverend Benoit's hands go up and he hollers. the person in the middle is thinking that whatever hit him didn't hit me. I don't belong here. It just jumped over me. So now even the spirit is not diverse in here. We need to be able to explain what it is we do, how we do, and not only that, why we do it.
That's excellent.
What happens if, just theoretically speaking, if churches outside of church get together? I don't think it's a cardinal sin or written in stone that the only way we could actually build relationships is in a service.
Certainly agree.
What happens when we start initiating faith-based initiatives outside the church and start working together in that vernacular? What it does, it allows people to let down their hair, and they don't have to prove how many scriptures they know, or do you shout versus I shout, or your hands raised, because we're all in a circle now, in a place where we all can be successful with whatever that faith-based initiative may be, whether it's a HUD home or whether it's going to volunteer at a boys or girls club. At our church, we do a lot of projects with group homes, and I've noticed that in doing that, it has been spectacular, not only for the kids on the side of DFACS, but it has been an unbelievable experience for the children in our church to now have the opportunity to experience what we preach, is that you're blessed and you're fearfully and you're wonderfully made, because you see where you could be, but you see where you are. So now other words come into play, like grace. And I think a lot of times when we get outside the church, one problem we have is that one fear is that everything's in the church, and the people coming to church don't realize that they're the church going to a building. So I think we do, and piggybacking off that, we do have to continuously stretch the power that resides in each individual. And once we start really tapping into the internal person, I think then we'll start really seeing a lot of successful things happen with each individual externally.
Pastor Campbell, you wanted to respond?
Yes. Fear, I once heard, was an acronym of false evidence appearing real. And we as leaders in the church have to be about the business of dealing with the false evidence. We need to open our pulpits to other cultures.
Yes.
We need to encourage the church to go out and to do projects in the community that they're uncomfortable with. I have people who are afraid, no, I don't say afraid, who would rather not deal with the seniors. I have some who would rather not deal with the children, and those are the very places I send them, because that's false evidence appearing real. And so we as leaders need to set the example and be out in front, disseminating, making whatever their fear is or their false evidence, showing them how wrong their perception is.
Yes.
And it starts with us being willing to invite others in to be in front of them, to allow them to speak, as well as watch the Spirit jump over them.
Pastors, you want to respond? If not, I'll continue. So we've talked about diversity, we've talked about barriers, we've talked about inclusion, but it is nearly impossible to talk about diversity without bringing up the conversation of race. And as you all know, in this country currently, there is an ongoing dialogue, and I think even a greater acknowledgement that we have a racial problem. We have always had a racial problem in this country. On the foundation of this country, we have had issues of race and dealing one with another based on how we looked. What role then should the faith community play in fostering these conversations on race inside of the church as well as outside of the church?
First and foremost, I think we have to recognize that it is there. And you can sing hymns, you can anoint with oil, you can run rap laps around the church, but race issues still remain. They're there, and lest God move, will remain for some time. I like what Pastor Wynn said. Some of our relationships need to be built in common zones before inviting you over into a place where you may feel less comfortable.
Right.
So doing ministries together outside where we have common goals, where there's a common platform and no one is threatened by being, quote unquote, on a foreign ground. I think that's where we start. I also want to say that when it comes to worship, this may be somewhat controversial, but I'm somewhat controversial. If I'm choosing on Saturday night a certain type of music that I want to go and listen and dance to, that's my choice. And the place that I may go, possibly hip-hop from the 80s, Biggie, Pop, Rakim, y'all don't know nothing about that. That's what I want to hear. I know the dances. I'm comfortable with the lyrics. That's what I hear. How much different is Sunday mornings for us? You go where you're comfortable, where the music speaks to you, where the worship speaks to you. Sometimes I think we take this issue of inclusion and diversity and we're forcing it in areas where it's simply just a choice. I, on Saturday night, may not desire to go to a country western concert.
Amen.
That's just not in my repertoire. But I want to go where I'm comfortable. So does that make me not diverse? Or does that allow me, with the hours that I have for myself and for choosing, to use them in an area where I'm comfortable? Which I think also at times applies to Sunday morning. It's a day of choice.
As we speak about race, and it being the one huge topic in 2016 going into 2017, we have to have our space that we can deal with ourselves, but we have to be ever mindful of being able to educate and to include where we can. It's not always going to be acceptable. You're going to oftentimes run into those that are totally ready for divisive argumentation by virtue of what they've been taught, what they're hearing, what is constantly played in their mindsets. So we don't go in here naive. Let's not do that. That's dangerous. But we need to go in here ready to address it when and where we can to help, I guess, bridge the gap or bridge over troubled waters, if you will. And so we have to be mindful as the religious body to know the difference between when we can extend that olive branch, if you want to call it that, and when we need to be apprehensive about who we're extended to for whatever the reason is.
When you start to unfold racism, the Bible says that judgment shall start in the house of the Lord. And I think there's a reason for that, because some of the most racist places and most segregated places you go is to church on Sunday. In church, you have different compartments. Those who have money sit together and share a meal after church versus those who don't have a ride to church and have to use church transportation. Seldomly not do we ever find those people conversing and building relationships. So I hate to say that, but it's sad, but it's true. And I think that if we're going to start dealing with racism in any way, form, or fashion, we have to start looking in the church first and watching how our churches within the church are segregated. And how do we deal with that to get everybody thinking with one mind and one heart and one soul? And I think if it starts in the house, then we can start spreading abroad. But we have to, as someone said earlier, we have to distribute the truth and not fear losing members. When you start preaching to members to keep members, then actually you might have a lot of members, but you don't have a lot of great outcome.
Thank you.
We as a church, in regards to race, there's only really one race, and it's the human race. And so when we stop segregating everything by the color of our skin, but as Dr. King said, start to deal with the content of our character, we can move forward. And not only one of my focus is that church is just not Sunday morning. Church is all week. Your workplace is a place of ministry. You represent Christ as a child of God no matter where you are. So you represent the church, and if your character is bad in other places, then it's not going to speak or inviting others to come that you may have a close relationship with, because the way you act all week is not inviting or encouraging them to attend with you anywhere on Sunday for worship. So as we start to rephrase our thinking of not race based on color, economics, but race based on the fact that we're humans, then not only us as African Americans, but Latinos and Caucasians, all of us can start to come together in a common human form of worship, whether you want country western or R&B. And I'm with Pastor Wilson on that. You know, Sunday morning worship is a choice. What flavor? I'm not going to be comfortable with country western. I'm not, because I really don't like it. And some people of other cultures are not going to be comfortable with gospel. And I think that's really okay. But if we operate as a human race all week, Sunday's no issue.
I still think that we are spiritualizing something that has a spiritual context but a natural application. There is no sign on the door of my church that says blacks only. I've not seen signs like that. Sometimes you're going to catch the fish that are in the pond in which you live.
Right. That's right.
The community in which I pastor, the last time I checked the statistics, was 71% black. Clayton County, 71% black. If you can take and allow me to make up a rural town, Podunk, Georgia, if the community is predominantly of one culture, do they have a diversity issue? If that's all that's there. So sometimes I think we're forcing an issue in places where it does not apply. Because if the church is segregated on Sunday morning, then so are other facets of our lives throughout the week. I worship where I'm comfortable, be it in a United Methodist church, be it in a Pentecostal church. But some of your comfort comes from your own personal exposure. Some places are segregated due to lack of exposure, so therefore you go where you are comfortable. So I struggle with thinking that lack of diversity in churches is a spiritual problem. I was talking to one of my white brothers this couple of days ago and talking about the same issue. And he said to me, a black pastor at times is going to struggle to attract others from other races. And he walked away. It's the end of the conversation. I was waiting for some other type of divine revelation. He had none. He had none. So I think I'm looking at diversity from a different context of, are we forcing something in place? Are we trying to do this to look a certain? I don't really know. I preach to those who show up. The doors swing on welcome hinges. There are no, and not just racial issues, also for lifestyle preferences as well. Y'all not ready for that conversation. Whosoever will, let them come.
Yes.
So for me, the issue of diversity is broader than color, but it's not as narrow as let's tell everybody to come. They're still not coming.
Right.
Because they're comfortable elsewhere. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Right. Let me push that
Push.
just for a moment. And MC, give me my cue at about 7 minutes, because I certainly want to take questions from our audience. But one of the footprints of the church is making the church relevant for the world, whether that be educational world, government world, business world, and we've got many people from the business community here this morning. One of the things that I am concerned about, especially when I hear people say that race is only an issue in business world, or race is only an issue in educational world, or race is only an issue in government world. What I often suggest to folk is that people who attend churches are the same people who are going to businesses, same people working in government. There are judges, there are politicians, there are school teachers, there are restaurant owners, there are baristas at Starbucks. So the world and the church cross-pollinates, intersects all the time. When Dr. Mays, Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, former president of Morehouse College, suggested that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in the culture, he was saying it in the context, and I'm glad you used that reference, saying it in the context of people are going to have to leave the church and they're going to have to go to work on Monday morning. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to face colleagues and face people of other races. And so if people can't worship together, then how can we work together effectively? Now, I know the issue for many of us who have businesses, and I'm a business owner as well, we know that racism exists in companies, on jobs, with employees. Would you all agree with that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, how is it that the church translates its methods of healing and wholeness from its walls into business, into government, into educational systems, so that we can deal with the real realities of racism that pervade all of these different sectors?
I'd like to say that it's going to take the one thing, and that's education. We always have to go back to education. Somebody said education is the last great financial balance sheet, if you will. The education, because what we are learning at home is part of our upbringing, mm-hmm. and what we see sometimes enforce that upbringing, and what we constantly engage ourselves Monday through Friday solidifies that upbringing. And where education is not interjected to try to change, at least open the door for creative thinking in order to change your mind, to change your life, it becomes your reality. Yeah. And when that reality is cemented in that mindset, that's your life set. Right. So I go back to the one thing that's going to change anything, and that's the education. That's whether it's in the biblical preaching, mm-hmm. or in just the statistics, or whether you show the examples, whatever the case may be, however best to reach that, it's got to be education. Right.
I think something interesting comes out of that, because we're dealing with a seesaw. Yeah. When we talk about the business vernacular versus the spiritual. Right. You have the business vernacular that is driven by the almighty dollar. Mm-hmm. So you have people that never miss a day at work, and they raise their hand high and say, I have perfect attendance at work. But then they're at church every now and again, because over here, the driving force is currency. Over here, the driving force is spirituality. Over here, you're looking for people who are volunteering. You're asking people in the church to do a lot of things that they've never seen. Over here, it makes sense because 1 + 1 = 2. Faith-based business. The medium for that has to be the mission. And I think that comes with each individual. As Dr. Wilson said, I don't know if that's so much the church responsibility as it is an individual premise as to this is what I want to see happen. Dr. King wouldn't have never been as powerful and as impactful as he was if he didn't have a crowd following him. A lot of times a pastor can go out, and if the people are afraid or the people don't see that same vision, the pastor really not leading, they're just taking a walk. because the people don't see it the way the pastors see it. And a lot of times pastors struggle with, over here it's easier in the workplace because these people look at work as their means to an end. This is how I work, I get fed, this is how my family survives. In church, people a lot of times, it's sad to say, but they go to church and say, I go to church to come out of church being full of emotions. I feel better today, but I really didn't get anything accomplished at church, but I can ease my conscience by saying I was present. So how do we bring the workplace and the church together? And I think the one term that we have to look at, if the panel would think the same, would be willpower. How do we get both sides to start looking at the willpower in terms of the self-discipline in the workplace mean the same as self-discipline in church, or the self-control in the church means the same as self-control in the business vernacular? Or do we have people, as the gentleman said with the leadership group came up, that are looking at churches now and saying, I'm going to this church because of what they have to offer, versus I'm going to this church because of the number of members they have and because they're on television? You have to apply for jobs, and when you apply for jobs, a lot of times you're looking at what the salary is. People don't just apply for church because people are not really sold out on it. They feel like I can just make a move and it doesn't cost me. So when you look at the two and you try to implement, how do we deal with this in terms of racism? I don't know if we look at it from a spiritual aspect. I think we look at it from an individual premise of each person and come up with some type of criteria to get people maybe first of all starting to team build and start working as a team or a unit, and then maybe perhaps we can build, because the term religion scares people. Because religion a lot of times is what an individual see in their own eyes, versus the fundamental foundation of what God really installed in terms of the Word. So, do we look at business and church the same, or do we piggyback off of what Dr. Wilson said? It's an individual premise, and how do we get individuals excited and ignited to at least start coming together, working together? With Porsche, that's down on our end of town now, would they start partnering with Dr. Wilson or Dr. Wynn, who are from churches that are not necessarily Bishop Jake's church, but churches that are doing great things in the community? And what does that look like? Do we even have a chance to get in the door to start trying to mend some type of team building prospects?
And that's a beautiful facility.
It is.
Beautiful. Does anybody want to respond to that?
I think racism needs to be addressed by everybody. One group can't just initiate it and be excited about the dialogue or the conversation. It's got to be everyone, because racism comes from all different directions. We, as African Americans, are racist, have some racist issues as well as Hispanics and Caucasians. So unless we all come to the table, that's the only way that we're going to deal with a systemic issue. Because we can sit and preach and talk about it all day, but we're talking to each other.
But
with a few exceptions. But we all need to come to the table and deal with it. And it could start with a small group and grow, but it needs to start.
It does. And the question that I would have in response to that is, do you think that conversations around race are effective when just minorities are at the table? Or must the dominant group, white America that is, be at the table to have conversations about true and life-changing conversations about race? How do you all feel about that?
I think the first thing you have to do is sweep around your own front door. The black church has issues within the black church. So before we begin to invite people to a table where the water is bitter, we need to deal with our own issues. The word denomination has a root word, dynamo, which simply means to divide. So all of us, many of us, are a part of organizations whose theme is to divide. I don't think we fully embrace this being the faith-based panel. The one thing that binds us together is our faith, and our faith is centered around one central figure, and that is Jesus the Christ. And if you look at Jesus' ministry, this dude was radical. I mean, he was hanging out at the red light district at the time of night when he knew the sisters was going to be on stroll. That's how he dealt with the woman who had several husbands. They literally talked about Jesus and says he sits with sinners. Jesus, every time he went to church, he caused a problem. He went one time armed and dangerous because they were in church selling those bootleg Jordans and the fake, y'all know, all right, he turned over the money changers.
There you go.
So the radical nature of Jesus has been lost from the church because we're more comfortable in the church because it's call and response. Say amen, amen, and you feel like you're doing something. They've been trained to respond to you. Jesus' work happened in unpoliced environments with people who were embedded in their own ways. And I wonder, why did Jesus do that? Look at his history. His grandmother was Rahab. To call Rahab a prostitute was a demotion. She ran the den. So he was comfortable around people who had issues. The church world is not comfortable around folks who have issues. When you come to church, we want you neatly folded and creased to sit into what we believe is worship.
Right.
So until we begin to expand our understanding of Jesus' ministry and stop making it our ministry,
Amen.
we won't grow. Our walls will not expand because we're too busy trying to do us instead of doing him. And when we do him, then I think he'll do the drawing. Because all we're doing is creating policies and practices and having another meeting at Chick-fil-A. I've eaten so many chicken minis at Chick-fil-A, I could almost cluck. We need something spiritual and powerful to happen to change a mindset and not just another organization, not just another meeting, not just another church policy.
Yeah.
And take the church outside of the walls. Church should be a place where we come to get refilled and replenished to go out to do the work.
Exactly.
And so if our focus is on growing the ministry and not the people, because it's the people that are going to make the difference, and we only have 3 hours. So we as leaders have to prepare the people to go out into the world and do as Jesus has commanded us to do, to be that light in darkness, to move in places where we're not welcome or wanted or uncomfortable with. Because if we continue to condition, and not present company excluded, condition the people to just come to worship, then we're doing a disservice.
Yes.
Because the work is outside of the church. The work is at your workplace. The work is in your home. The work is in the grocery store. The work is at Starbucks. The work is at Chick-fil-A. The work is outside of the church. So we need to work at the mindset of the people. Come to church to get replenished and refilled, but don't come there and just stop. Get what you need, get your gas tank full, and then go represent Christ.
Let me interject really quick here, ask one more question, because I definitely want to get to this, and then we'll shift gears and take questions from the audience. We've just recently had a presidential election, and we now have a new president-elect. Now, for many people in the country, this has signaled quite a scary and fearful response. Many are afraid because of the rhetoric that was positioned on President-elect Trump's campaign. Now, I'm not speaking partisanship right now, whether you voted Democratic or Republican. The facts are the facts. And many people are nervous right now. And I don't know if it was the same for you all as it was for me, but our church was full on Sunday. It's full every Sunday, but we had overflow on Sunday because people are nervous because of the racist and xenophobic and homophobic and misogynistic language that people have heard from our president-elect. And so our nation, at the end of Tuesday night going into Wednesday morning, we had a new president, but we were also more divided now than we've ever been. How does the church deal with that kind of division? Because, you're talking about diversity and inclusion with this issue as well. How does the church deal with this?
I'm glad we're uncomfortable. I really am. If we believe in a sovereign God, and this is radical, but I'm radical.
Absolutely.
If we believe in a sovereign God, what do you do when God gives you what you feared instead of what you wanted? Because if he is as powerful as you say he is, why didn't he just give us Hillary? Why didn't he give us Barack? Why don't we just make Barack king? So if God is sovereign and God allowed such to be so, where are we? What are we to do now? The polls are closed, but your hymn books aren't. The polls are closed, but your Bible isn't. We're going to have to be people of faith. We're going to have to be people who are trusting in something higher than governmental powers. And maybe that's one of the messages God wants us to get. Put your trust in me and not in man. Why are you worried? The same God that kept you through slavery, the same God that brought you through the depressions, the same God that made ways out of no way, is the same God that's still here. And y'all worried about a wall. God is a wall expert. The Great Wall of China was up. It's now a fragment. The Wall of Berlin was up. It's down. There was also a wall called Jericho that came down and no weapons were even used. We're worried about stuff that is not even in it just shouldn't even be on our plate. I think this is a great opportunity for people to refresh their spiritual lives, because we've gotten so doped up on social media. And to be honest with you, the church as a whole is struggling because of social media. You don't have to go to church no more. You can hear Pastor Wilson on the phone, and I'll get a text message. You was good today. You wasn't in church. I saw you online. Did you send your offering? Bye, Pastor. We got bigger issues, y'all. Or let me say this. We got local issues first. Before we start trying to do other things. Will there be some change in America? Yes. But change ain't nothing new to you. If grandmama and granddaddy are alive, call them. They can tell you about hard times. Go back in history. We've been through stuff before. What y'all tripping about? It is what it is. Lastly, you should have kept your hood card. Which means you know how to survive if you gotta go backwards.
Okay.
We done became middle class and you traded in your hood card. You don't know how to use MARTA no more. You don't know how to walk to the store and just get one pack of bread and Nene got some bologna and the whole block eat. Y'all don't know nothing about that. That's how we used to be back in the day. But now we don't even know our neighbors.
Amen.
When's the last time somebody borrowed a cup of sugar from you? A cup of milk. So we've lost community, and I think now more than ever, we're going to need each other.
Thank you.
Right.
In spite of whether you work on Wall Street or in the alley, we are going to need each other. So this is a refining of the faith of believers. White, black, candy stripe, I don't care. It's going to refine our faith. And who do you believe?
That's right.
God or man?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you. Others.
We have nothing to fear but fear itself. We've come through several presidents in our lives. Some we were favorable to, some of them we were totally against, and this may be another time. However, much like what Pastor Wilson said, and I'm not going to try to echo what he said because it was so powerful and impactful, I'm going to leave it right there. We have to get back to who we were called to be and not who we have become. We have become somebody that's any wind fears us, causes us to go into deep depression. And we begin to wonder, oh, woe is me, and what did I do, and how do I overcome? We have nothing to fear but fear itself.
I think there's a saying, change is inevitable. And life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% of how you react.
Thank you.
If you ask anybody here, irregardless of who has been elected as president-elect, you still have challenges in your life which cause some form of change. When change comes, it's not that the fact that it comes, it's how do you handle change, whether it is your kids are going off to school or you find out the tuition has increased while your kids are in college. Your daughter tell you at the last minute she's going on a field trip and money's already funny, and now that just puts you in a different place. Change is inevitable. How do we deal with change is what drives us. What's your mission? And in the church, I think, in speaking on diversity, a lot of churches, the people in the church don't even know the vision or the mission. They just go to church. Once people lock into the vision, and I tell the people at Champions all the time, I cannot be the mountaintop of your life because eventually God will call me home. But if you get this vision and this mission statement imprinted in your heart, then you're connecting more with God than a preacher. If you go to church on Sunday and preaching is what you're just really going for, not to get to the altar, then you missed it. The preacher cannot be your God. It's what the preacher gives out of their mouth that resonates with your soul and causes you to grow. And when change comes, you're prepared for it. I think there's an old saying says, prepare for war in time of peace. And I think the best way to do that is to meditate, study your word both day and night. Seek ye the kingdom of God first and his righteousness. If you stick with those principles, I think the world is yours, regardless of who's in it. And I think people don't make you. It's only you who break you when your mind has been broken.
Pastor Campbell, wrap us up. Amen.
I believe this is going to be a season where our faith foundation is going to prove itself, whether it's got cracks that is going to give way at the slightest quake, or if our foundation is strong enough to stand. And as Pastor Wilson said, our foundation is in Jesus Christ and not the President of the United States, whoever that might be. So as we hold on to who Jesus is, we can ride out the storm, because the Bible is full of examples of where even in the exile of his people, there was still a remnant.
Yes.
Are we part of the remnant? Or are we going to be part of those who gave way to the other idols?
Thank you.
Can we appreciate our panel? Thank you so much. We have about 5 minutes remaining, and I certainly want to take questions from the audience. Let me go to my brother here, and then back here. Yes.
Test.
Excellent.
It's on.
Excellent discussion this morning. I want to preface what I'm saying by a couple of statistics and get your reaction to this. One of the fastest growing demographics in the United States right now is people over 90. People living longer, better access to health care, et cetera. But the other statistic that I want to convey to you is that according to the Census Bureau, as we speak, 50% of the U.S. population right now, under the age of 5, are minorities or interracial. I'll say that again. 50% of the population as we speak right now, under the age of 5, are interracial or minorities. So with that being said, there was a Nobel Prize winning economist by the name of Gunnar Myrdal. In his book, The American Dilemma, he references two emotions that drive this whole issue around race: white fear and black anger. And he looked at the causes of each, and the lists were almost entirely opposite. And at the top of white fear, you had this whole issue of interracial marriage. And in black anger, it was about resources and access to equity. So in terms of these two emotions, fear and anger, how do you address this from a religious perspective in your congregations?
Great question.
I address it with the one factor that I think binds us regardless of what race, creed, or color you are, and that is the grace factor. It's hard for me to look down upon anybody when I realize the only difference between them and me at that point is the grace of God. Grace is simply God bestowing on each of us things that we don't even deserve. So when you begin to look at someone else sideways, you have to take a good look at where you are and how it was nothing but grace. Sometimes us professional religious people, we feel as though we've earned to be here. We're qualified to be here, but it's nothing more than the grace of God. It's going to take a God encounter for races to come together. Because that's it. It's going to take, we've been here too long. It's going to take a God encounter. For example, 9/11, nobody cared about race. They were pulling people, saving people. Nobody asked, listen, I'm a Catholic, do you want me to pull you out from underneath this stone? It didn't matter. It's going to take some type of God encounter, and I'm not suggesting terrorism or anything catastrophic, but it's going to take something to put us in place where we recognize one thing: we need each other.
Looking at the statistic, 50% under the age of 5. I think with that, it is also a proven fact that racism is a learned behavior. If we start capturing our children with the church component at a younger age, when we're having youth ministry, I know at our church we have a curriculum every month for the youth department. And not only do they have praise and worship, but they also learn the mission and the vision of the church in addition to math and English. And that's a part of their curriculum every Sunday. You know, then of course they have snacks as a reward. But what it does is it educates the kids more so and make our kids be made whole. And so kids growing up doesn't have that fear. I was just talking to one of the elders at my church yesterday, and he said, Pastor, what's one of the things you're most proud of right now that you're currently doing with your family? And I simply stated, ensuring that both of my daughters are exposed. So no man can come and just take away, you know, their most inner beings because of their lack of knowing. So whether it's to a restaurant or education, what have you, they've been exposed, so therefore they're empowered. And I think if we continue to look at that aspect in the church, and granted, we can't change the whole world one church, but we can start one church at a time, with one child at a time. And if we start looking at the curriculums in church and start seeing exactly what are we teaching and how are we making our children whole, I think that's a start.
I want to chime in and concur with what Pastor Wilson said and what Pastor Wilson and Wynn said. One, that it's going to take God to intervene, and two, it's going to take the church. With those statistics, the birth of these children are more likely to younger folks, younger millennials. And by virtue of that being the catalyst of this, we're having kids by kids that may not be astute, misuse that word, aware, and not able to inform or educate our kids. What does that do to the community, the education, and the religious community? We have to be that teacher, not just to the kids, but to the parents, to help the parents understand, to help the parents reinforce, at least get an understanding. If it's not even what they want to teach, at least they know they don't want to teach because they've now learned it. But if they don't know it, they can't disseminate it. And all too often, we're working with a body that has not had the grandmama effect, if I can use that. Mama didn't, I'm not talking about, no, that one.
You did point to the left when you said that.
No.
He sure
To
did.
the right when you said that.
Grandmama's a female.
I was
Would you
gonna
agree?
move over.
Most times. Yes, Grandma.
Anyway, the learning, the upbringing is my goal, is where I'm going at. And so we have to step in to the best of our abilities to be able to show forth those statistics and be able to instill why this is so important for you to understand it, because you are that first line of educators in the home. You can't expect this to be taught in preschool and kindergarten. They're there to educate you, not to give you the history as to the family dynamics.
In regards to the 50% being biracial and minorities, as it's already been said, that grace is definitely a major factor in the church moving out, but also love.
Thank you.
Love towards those children, love towards those parents, love towards the grandparents and the great-grandparents. I mean, love is what the church should be about. And that those young people that are coming, they've already changed the dynamic of race, if I can use that. I mean, so we need to find out how they're dealing with it and learn from them why we teach them about the love of Christ and how they can journey through life or navigate through life with that love, grace, and mercy that we are so secure in.
Let me go to my sister here, and then we'll close with the brother in the back.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm glad that you actually brought up about our youth. I wanted to gear this more towards the millennials because they are the future, and racism is something that you're not born with. It's a mindset that you're actually taught in your upbringing. So what I wanted to ask you is, as a person, a millennial who is growing closer, spiritually with God, a lot of those in my circle, if you ask most millennials, they'll tell you that they're spiritual and not necessarily religious or even attend a church or even have a church home. What I want to know is, our millennials are going to change the world one day. And I want to know what you're doing in your respective ministries to engage the millennials to come back to church, to have a spiritual relationship with God, and how you're engaging them to use their spirituality in the workplace and in leadership and future endeavors that they may encounter.
I thank you for making clear distinction between spiritual and spiritualist. Spiritual has some type of God context. Spiritualist is when you claim a God, but you do whatever you want to. You don't come to his house, you don't read his letter, you don't listen to what he says, you just do what works for you. I think the millennials and the generations that come before are doing the same thing right now. The millennials have their arms folded with their backs to their elders, saying they won't listen to me. And the elders have their arms folded with their backs to the millennials, saying they won't listen to me. The dialogue has got to be reopened. The challenge that millennials have is that in the palm of your hand, that cellular device,
Come on now.
they have so much knowledge. My 10-year-old daughter can go on her phone, God forbid, and Google whatever she wants, and it comes. But that's knowledge. Millennials don't understand the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge comes in the palm of your hand.
Yes.
Wisdom is knowledge multiplied by time.
Thank you.
It can't be looked up.
Yes.
It can't be bought. So here's my point. At some point, millennials are going to have to find someone to listen to, because the answers that they are finding are sprints. They're not marathons. They're for short distance, and then we'll get a look for another answer. But to get to the long distance, you're going to need a guide. You're going to need someone who can help lead you. Two types of leaders I look for. I look for leaders and feeders. A leader is someone who may have been where I need to go and they can tell me how to get there. But then there are feeders, someone who can put something in my lunch bag to keep me strong on the way. The generation of Gen Xers, we have to open up, we literally have to force a dialogue so that we can break open some myths that we're not as old as you think we are. We got some dirt under our nails. We did some stuff. And all we're trying to do is save you from the same scars that we've covered up with these suits. The same scars that don't appear on our resumes. That's the tragedy of the next generation, where they make the same mistakes we made. Generational curses can stop with conversation. We're just not talking. So we have to create safe spaces in the church. This is going to be hard. Close the Bible. Turn on YouTube. Pull up stuff that's going to make the older saints cringe, but the younger generations, yeah, that's good, that's what we do. And then talk about it. We're going to have a Juju on that beat contest at my church. I'm convincing families to do a Juju on that beat video on a phone, and we're going to play it on the big screen at the church.
For all those who don't know what that is, go and Google it.
Google it.
Please, go and Google it.
It's a hip-hop song. And I want to see grandmamas, you know, getting their running man, all that stuff. We've got to bridge this gap so we can have conversation. The biggest dilemma is that we're not talking. And when we begin to talk, and we begin to touch flesh and not keyboards, you'll see our humanity and reconnect with the fact that we're not trying to stop you from your fun. We just want to make sure at the end of the day that you can put food on little Dougie's plate, that you can pay for the house, that you can be spiritually strong. And that's just going to come from dialogue.
And one of the things that I would add to that we do, so speaking as a millennial who leads a growing church in Atlanta, one of the things that we've done to bring the average age of our church down to about 35 now is we have allowed young people to lead. If they are young and professional and seem like they have a semblance of professionalism and ability to take on tasks and responsibility, whether it's leading an usher board or leading a major committee, then we let them do it. And what we do at the same time, simultaneously, is partner them with someone who's led before. And so you have this apprenticeship that is happening all at the same time. And so it's helped us tremendously. Two young ladies who lead our young adult ministry, I'm proud to say they turn up every now and then. But the issue is we're trying to reach that demographic.
Right.
And so why would I appoint someone over my young adult ministry who is out of touch with the reality of the societal norms of young adults?
Right.
And so it has given them more responsibility. I told them, look, if you're going to take this, take it seriously, clean up your social media pages, make sure that you're setting the best example for the church, because this is a real position. And they've done it with elegance and grace, and they've matured. And so I would say to any faith-based organization, any church in particular, let young people lead. But don't just throw them out there. Make sure that they have some kind of support system. And when you do it, it will reap more benefits than you know. Let me go to this last question here, and then we'll conclude.
Thank you. We're running out of time. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Pastor Wilson, it's actually, you addressed a couple of points that I find to be very interesting. One of the things you talked about was the diversity issue, about how you bringing attention to something that doesn't necessarily need attention when it comes down to diversity in the churches. It's like the whole idea about black on black crime. Black on black crime occurs based on the fact that blacks live amongst blacks, and if a crime is committed, you're going to do it within your neighborhood versus going out your neighborhood. Whites commit crimes amongst each other, and blacks also do the same thing. So the churches, when you go to a community that's a black community, the churches in the community, that's where you're going to go to church. If you live in a neighborhood that's mixed, I lived in Tribeca. When I went to any church in Tribeca, there was a mixed neighborhood because of the fact that it was mixed. We had Asians, Indians, blacks, whites, all different types of races. So the whole idea behind not having enough diversity is really about where the church is located. It's about location. And second, as I stood up, my father behind me, I heard him grumbling because he knows I'm an atheist, and I've been atheist for quite a long time. And so you guys talked about racism and things of that nature, reaching out. But the country in itself looks upon as a person such as myself as a threat. My question to you guys is, what do you think a person who's an atheist believes? Because I think a lot of people feel as though we don't have any faith, or we don't have any belief, or we don't have any morals. Atheist is more about, I just don't get it. I can't see what you guys see. I spoke earlier about me having an undergrad in business, but I also have a master's in neurobiology. And so I'm a scientist, so I need facts. I come from Brooklyn, and show and prove is how I grew up. And so the whole idea behind a person's faith, when I stand back and look at the different problems that people have within the churches and just in the religion itself. I had a conversation with someone yesterday. They said that they have Christians and they have Catholics. I'm like, aren't they the same thing? Christianity is the umbrella and all the other ones fall underneath it. And then we have our Muslims, and we have our Judaism, and we have our Hindus, and we have our Buddhists. They all have different factions within them that are continuously going against each other, or not necessarily going against, but differ in certain areas. My issue is that the fear of the unknowns, which you guys talked about, is that, yeah, I'm an atheist, but I'm not a devil worshiper, because if I don't believe in God, I don't believe in the devil. I believe that you do what you're supposed to do in life, and you do it because you want to do it. I don't want to be afraid to do wrong. I like to do right. And so the whole idea behind the whole, persons of, I can't even consider it non-faith, because I have faith that I do. If I, like my sons, I put my sons out there, I make sure they are educated, I make sure they're fed well, and I make sure I'm part of their lives. So I have faith that my sons will be great individuals in the future. It may not happen, but I definitely have that faith that it will happen. So the whole idea behind not having faith is not really what an atheist is. I need proof. I need facts. I need a consistent conversation based on repeated actions. So the fear, the country's not even ready. I mean, we could have been ready for a woman as a president, a black man as a president, a businessman as a president, but the country's afraid of an atheist. Why? Because we want facts. And that's my problem. I would love to go to the churches and have a conversation. Invite persons such as myself to talk to people and talk to the vast majority of your congregation to discuss things, question, go back and forth, have dialogue. But most people will never, ever allow that to happen because of the fear of the unknown.
Are you in Atlanta?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
You
sir.
are welcome at the Center of Hope.
I appreciate that.
And Champions for
welcome.
Christ too on that. Yeah.
Then you can go down to Champions.
Yeah.
And I've got a lot of places that you can go. Your statement was so. Did you have a specific question that I missed? Because I was just engrossed.
My question was, what are your views on atheists? What do you guys think of when you hear the term atheist?
It's a term that's not feared because love conquers all fear. And so atheists are people who need Christ as far as we are concerned. And the fact that you are not embracing that concept, dialogue about it ought to be honored. And so if these guys are too busy, look me up on the internet or fly down to San Diego.
You got another appointment in San Diego. You
We'd
doing
love
good.
to talk to you about it. We'd love to talk to you about it because I believe you have faith in something, and we just personally, from my faith-based tradition, like to redirect that faith.
I see my MC trying to wrap up here. If you all could speak offline about that and certainly
Yes.
connect and change
Absolutely.
information.
Yes, because
that'd be
he's looking
wonderful.
for facts, and aren't they right here? They're all over the place. So that was very good and very, very,
Brooklyn.
very. I gotta say it's.
Did you say Brooklyn?
It's not so much bold. It's a person that has something that they want to say, and they weren't afraid to speak his mind the way he saw fit.